Hey, Forrest, welcome to the Beyond Jaws podcast. Are you ready to talk about sharks and science communication?
No, I hate those things. Yes, I'm ready. Let's go.
I love it. Love it.
Yeah. Well, welcome to this is our debut episode for our second year of the Beyond Jaws podcast, and we're really super happy to have Forrest Galante on. He's an adventurer. He's a wildlife biologist. Did his degree at University of California, Santa Barbara. He's hosted several popular TV shows, including Extinct or Alive, several Shark Week shows. His new program is Mysterious Creatures. He's a co-host of the Wild Times podcast. He even found time to write a book, darn it. And we're super stoked, Forrest, to have you on the show. That's great.
And if I may, a close friend and co-host of the one and only Dave Ebert from Land of the Lost Sharks.
Yeah, that was an amazing show we did as well. Maybe we can touch on that a little later too, as well as your new program coming up this year. Let's get started. We always ask our guests, how did you get interested in the field? Now, you're a little more into the wildlife biology, but includes sharks as well. And again, it's kind of a little bit of a layup knowing your background. But why don't you tell our audience that may not be as familiar with some of your background? Like, how'd you get started in the field? When'd you get interested in doing wildlife biology?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Dave and Andrew. You know, I grew up in Zimbabwe, right? So as you said, it was a little bit of a layup when it came to wildlife. But as a kid surrounded by, African megafauna, the thing that I was always hands down the most intrigued by was the ocean. And that would be very silly, being a kid from a landlocked African country. But I was always just so enamored with it. And I still to this day remember my first real memory of the ocean, which was going to the Bazarutu archipelago in Mozambique and pulling up a little rock cod, or rock hind as we call them here. And I looked at that fish and it sort of came up out of the depths, not knowing what it could be. Whereas when you fish in fresh water, you typically know what it's going to be, right? Like it's one of 5 or 6 things. But when you're fishing in the Indian Ocean, where I was, or even out here in the Pacific, as you guys know, you never know what it's going to be when you start reeling, right? And I pulled up this fish, and I still have this memory of this giant Portuguese guy, because we were in what used to be Portuguese East Africa, Mozambique, and he's like, "Oh, look at this, Forrest," and he shows me this little rock cod, and I was it was like at that moment I was like, I want to know everything that's down there. And so for a landlocked kid from Zimbabwe that grew up with all these bush animals, I was always obsessed with the ocean. I was obsessed with going there as much as I could. I always told my mom when I grow up, I'm going to live in Mozambique and have sand in my house and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't do that. But I've always loved the ocean. And I got started in the bush and spent a lot of time around animals. And I don't want to take away from any of that, because I was obsessed with all of the wildlife. But I've always had this drive and desire for marine animals. And when I came to California, I was able to sort of put that to fruition, both academically and just, with the access, because it wasn't like a once a year trip to the ocean any longer. It was like it was out my door.
How many times were you in the water, while going to university? Like, you were scuba diving all the time? Were you exploring, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I came over here from Zimbabwe when I was 14 years old. I finished up high school in California. And when I first came to California, this is really how my biggest connection with the ocean came. Now, I grew up pretty much bloody feral, right? I was running around barefoot. I was chasing snakes. I was catching lizards. I was getting chased by hyenas, you name it, because that's life in Zimbabwe as a farm kid. And when I came to California, I still was enamored by the ocean, but I didn't know anything about it. It was cold. It was dark. It was scary. I lived in Cayucas, guys, which is in Central California. It's not like beautiful Santa Barbara where I am.
I know Cayucas well.
Yeah, and it's cold, and it's stormy, and it's full of white sharks, and it's kind of creepy, right? And so when I first came to the U.S., I wasn't instantly drawn to that cold, dark ocean. Instead, I was like, oh, I'm going to do the things I grew up doing and run around the wilds of Cayucas, California. But that got tame very, very quickly, right? It's all like rolling cattle lands and a few grassy hills and a couple oak trees. And after exploring that heavily, I was like, well, this is it. Like, I've caught the king snakes and the rattlesnakes. I've seen a bear. What else is there? It wasn't like being in Africa. And so one day, I still remember I was skateboarding home. I was 14 years old, and there was a garage sale. And at that garage sale, there was a absolutely useless black pole spear with 2 prongs. The third one was broken, rusted to shit, and an elastic band that was broken to crap, and a U.S. diver brand mask and snorkel, like the cheapest, crappiest, like Big 5 style brand you can get, right? And I rolled up on my skateboard as I was skating home, and I asked them how much, and I think the woman could tell I was just a poor kid because and I'll never forget this, for $1, I purchased the mask and snorkel and the pole spear. And so $1. And that very day, I went down to the bluffs just north of Cayucas, and I hopped in board shorts because I had no wetsuit. I think I borrowed somebody's like duck feet style flippers, you know, the kind you go boogie boarding with. So I had duck feet flippers, board shorts, and a rash guard, and the garbage U.S. diver mask and snorkel, and this crappy pole spear. And I hopped in the ocean and instantly got an ice cream headache. Fortunately, it was the summertime, but still, it's freezing. And this is getting to be a long story, but I'm like reliving it as I tell it. And I just remember I dunked my face in the water, and instantly I saw a surf perch. And then I saw a rubber lip perch. And then I saw a cabezon. And then I saw a kelpfish. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so much cooler than above land. Like, this is everything. Like, here's all the wildlife. And I felt like at any moment, a white shark would come around the corner, or an elephant seal would be down there, or a harbor seal would pop up, or an orca would swim by, or whatever. Even though very few of those things are likely to happen, I just felt that same feeling that I was used to as a kid growing up in the bush. Like, anything can happen. Anything's around the next corner. And I didn't last very long because I didn't have a wetsuit, but I do remember I speared a couple little fish. I took them home. My mom cooked them up. They tasted like shit because they were all perch, but I still, that was it. I was absolutely hooked at that point. And so to answer your question, Andrew, it started in high school before I even got to college, before I moved to Santa Barbara. And at that point in time, I began spending almost every day in the water. I would finish up with, just like I did at home, really, in the bush, but I would finish up with school, and if it was pumping, I'd grab my surfboard. If it was flat, I'd grab my garbage mask and snorkel and pole spear, and I'd hop in somewhere, and I'd just spend as much time as I could in the water.
Now the important question is, do you still have the mask and pole spear?
No, I don't. I kind of wish I'd kept them because they were such junk. I'd like have them up on the wall or something, but they really are relics. But no, I trashed them. I don't know when, a few years later, and on to bigger and better things. But I really wish I'd kept them.
So what ignited the passion behind seeing this? Like, obviously, in a way, from a wildlife perspective, you were spoiled in Africa to see all these amazing animals that here in North America we could only go see at a zoo. Sure. But then, you get to California, you discover the ocean. But what is it, do you think, that really ignites that fire when you see it? When you see these animals and you want to know more, what is that? Where did that curiosity come from? Like, have you always had that since you were a kid? Like, once you see an animal, you want to follow it, you want to know all about it. Is it more of a, you want to know about ecology, or are you like, I want to track it, I want to see what it does, I want to see the behavior and everything? Where does that passion come from?
Yeah, it's a good question, Andrew. You remember when you guys were kids, right? And you'd flip over a log and you'd find an earthworm, right? Right. And you'd be like, Mom, Dad, look at this earthworm. It's so cool. It's this earthworm, right? Well, most people grow out of that. I think I just grew worse. Like, I just wanted to know what it ate and where it slept and why it did that and what ate it and what was its place in the food chain. And the thing that really sort of ticked for me, and I'm sure a part of this is growing up in Zimbabwe, was the tracking and hunting, and I don't mean killing, but hunting down of these animals that others couldn't find or people had a hard time finding. And it's like rarity is the crown jewel, right? As soon as something becomes very, very rare, it's coveted. It's this crown jewel. And as someone who grew up in the bush, my family ran safari businesses, so I learned tracking from a very young age. I was always just obsessed with tracking, and I remember for us in Zimbabwe, there were a couple things, aardwolf, pangolin, leopard, that were at the top of that list, right? If you could track a leopard, oh my God, if you could find an aardwolf den, you're a top tier tracker. And I never did find any. Saw a few leopards, but I never did find any of those things as a kid. But the point was that crown jewel, that coveted thing was always there. And I think once I sort of explored California, and I'm not saying I saw everything, but I saw enough that I was like, oh yeah, just another half moon. Oh yeah, just another calico, just another sheep's head. Then it was like, oh, what is the rarest thing I can find? Where can I go to find the elusive white sea bass? What can I do to see this and that? And that just sort of spilled over into every facet of wildlife for me, not just the marine environment, but what are the rarest mammals? What are the most, unusual reptiles? What are the, as Dave knows, what are the rarest sharks in South Africa that we can go and find? And so I just became absolutely enamored with that. And I don't know if it's bred into me, or if it's a genetic predisposition, or it's a bit of wiring, or if it's just some calling to home. I don't know what it is.
Sound like it, when you, especially growing up in Zimbabwe, where your parents did safaris and stuff. They kind of like, when you're a kid, they just kind of basically said, don't go out and kill yourself, but go have a fun time in the bush. Pretty much growing up.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think I gave my mom a lot of gray hairs, that's for sure. Because she'd go out on safari and come back, and I'd have like a cobra and a pillowcase, and I'd be like, look what I got, and she'd be like, God, I hate this child. But it was a very wild upbringing. It was very much so a learn by doing sort of upbringing over there. And I think it's a lot like the United States used to be, like a long time ago, where it was just like, hey, take your what do they call, Daisy Rider BB gun, and go out and shoot a dove and grill it up and catch a fish and cook it on a fire that you make, and go out with your friends and play and come back at dinner time. And that was sort of how I grew up, and that's how I imagine a lot of the U.S. was, maybe still is, but not really where we all live.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I had like 2 rules. One is like, don't kill yourself and be home by 5 o'clock for dinner. That was it. And we'd just be running around like with our BB or pellet guns, and we'd go explore, find snakes, lizards, whatever we could find. As your kids, not growing up in Zimbabwe, but you find lizards and frogs and cool things like that. It was like, you spend a whole day just doing that, and then you just get home in time, so you make dinner. Otherwise, if you're late, you get your ass kicked. But that sounded like very similar, except you had crocodiles and poisonous snakes there. More poisonous snakes.
Yeah, that was a little different. You're bringing home something a little different.
But I think the feeling's the same, and that's one of the reasons, like, not to transition into the TV thing, but one of the reasons I love doing what I do is because I can communicate that sort of childish feeling that I still get as an adult, if you want to call me that. But it's I think so many kids lack that these days. They've all got these smartphones and these video games, and they run home from school and sit in front of a screen. And I just that was never an option in my upbringing, mostly because we didn't have internet when I grew up. We had TV, but it was sort of garbage TV. So it was never an option. And I get it, by the way. If I grew up where I live in Santa Barbara today, I'd probably go and play sports and run home and watch TV too. But I think if it had been Santa Barbara 40 years ago, or anywhere in the United States a long time ago, when those things weren't as accessible, that is where all your enjoyment came from and your entertainment came from. And to me, that's something that I'm always craving and chasing. I don't know if you saw, Dave, I know you and I exchanged messages on social media. Last night at 1 a.m., I was chasing a bear around my garden. He came in to kill our chickens. And it's not like the big thing, but I was just yelling at this bear, which is very rare in Santa Barbara. I was screaming at him to bugger off. And I got home, and I was so happy. I just chased a bear around my garden for 30 minutes who'd been killing my chickens. And I was like, God, this is better than sleeping. I was just so excited.
But let me ask you this. Like when you moved to the U.S., at 14 with that background, it's still a different time. Not a lot of people are chasing wildlife as kids at that time even. Was it a difficult thing from a social perspective to kind of come into a high school area and be like, hey, what are you doing after? And, you as are like, well, I'm going to go diving, or I'm going to go, chase some snakes. Did you want to come along? Like, did you have a tough time acclimating to that kind of, I guess sort of pressures?
Very much so. Yeah, I was the weird kid. I showed up in khaki safari shorts that ran halfway up my thighs and a little button down. And, that was what I used to wear. And I'd never not had a school uniform. I'd never not had a buzz cut before. I'd never been to a school that had girls at it. So that made me very nervous and uncomfortable and all the things that come with adolescence. And I was the weird kid. Now, fortunately, I had always been pretty adamant on my sports. And I'd loved, and it was a mandatory thing in Zimbabwe, but I'd loved playing rugby growing up. And so I think my one social saving grace was that I walked onto the football team because they didn't have a rugby team, and I was pretty good at football. So it was the only thing that made me not more of a weirdo. It was like the only thing that made me socially acceptable. But I'd still sort of skip practice when I could and go and do this and go and do that. And I was just the weird kid. Everybody'd be like, oh, yep, there goes Forrest. He's got a snake in his backpack. That's what he grabbed at lunch, you know? And it's like, yeah, I do. So yeah, I had a tough time. I got in fist fights. I got in trouble a lot. I got in trouble for things that in Zimbabwe would have been nothing, like what we just talked about. Mm-hmm. But in California, they're a big deal. I write about this in my book. I was in Cayucas. I'll make a very long story as short as I can. I ended up in possession of this huge Burmese python, okay, that somebody had...
Of course, as one would.
And so I built it this enclosure. It was like a 15-foot-long Burmese python. It was like a rescue, and somebody didn't want it, and they'd eaten somebody's cat, and blah, blah, blah. So I ended up with this huge snake. Now, I didn't have any money. We were broke as could be. We were literally on welfare when we fled from Zimbabwe. And so I had to feed this Burmese python, right? So I borrowed a BB gun, and I put on camo. Don't ask me why I did that. That was a huge mistake. And I went down to the local park, literally like the park with the playground, and I started sniping pigeons off the telephone wire, right? Now, this is good. I shot 3 pigeons, perfect for the snake. His name was Willie Eat Me. And I start walking back with these dead pigeons with this rifle on my shoulder. And next thing I know, there's helicopters overhead. There's police cars cruising by. Somebody had called in a terrorist threat because this guy in camouflage is walking around a playground with a BB gun. Now, that is just not because I'm a bad kid. I wasn't there to murder anybody.
Right.
Except for those
feed
pigeons.
Your python.
I was just just being a wild African kid. And so I got in trouble a lot for things like that, would be, they're more than slap on the wrists, but they were never like, I never had any ill intent. I was just being wild. And
Did they believe
I was
you?
also known for that.
Did they believe
Not
you
really.
at times?
No, not really. And not until you bring the 15-foot snake out of your bedroom do they go, okay, yeah, you're all right, I get it. Yeah.
I one thing you mentioned, and just so people really understand, like when you commented when the reason why you left Zimbabwe is you literally had to flee Zimbabwe because of political upheaval at the time there, and most people listen to the show. I mean, I've lived in Africa, as you know, and stuff, and so I know I've seen what that's like, and people don't really. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, but when you literally have to leave everything you have and leave your country and your home where you've lived for 14 years, more or less, it's pretty dramatic, especially traumatic, at any age, even as a kid. But yeah, you want to touch on that at all a little bit?
It was, Dave. With pleasure. Yeah, it was traumatic, and I think that might be one of my sort of longings for the wild type thing that is deep rooted. And if I ever bother to go to a therapist, she can dig it up. But I think when all the political turmoil was taking place, my escape was always to run into the bush because there was no danger there, at least not from people. It was just wildlife, and it was just being free. And so during the early 2000s, 99, 2000, 2001. Zimbabwe went through terrible land reform where President Robert Mugabe basically said anybody that had white skin couldn't own land any longer. And I won't go into the politics of it, but it wasn't like we'd been there a few months, right? My family was 6 generations Zimbabwean. We'd been there a very long time. So for us to get kicked out was crazy. Now, all that being said, literally one day, things got worse and worse. But as Zimbabweans, we dug in our heels and we just said, bring it on. And our neighbors got killed, and there was torture going on, and there was indoctrination through torture for the ZANU-PF, the political party. Things were getting crazy.
Wow.
And things got out of hand. We saw some terrible stuff. But one day, I literally came home to a bunch of war veterans, and I use that term lightly, but a bunch of people with guns that put guns in our mouths, put guns in the back of our heads, and said, "You have 24 hours to leave, or we'll murder you." And I actually marched upstairs and got my little rifle and said, bring it on. And my mom slapped me across the face and said, "Go pack your suitcase, you idiot." And so, yeah, at age 14, we left. We went one day with having a 200-acre farm and a flourishing safari business to the next day being on welfare in Oakland, California, with the 3 of us sharing a 1-bedroom apartment.
Wow.
So
you lost everything,
everything.
Yeah.
We left the United States, we left Zimbabwe with 3 suitcases of clothes and $400 and not a single other thing.
Wow. The reason I wanted you to touch on that is you hear people here today complain about different things about trivial stuff, but when you have to have actually known people. Like you literally had the clothes on your back and a suitcase, and that's all you had. It kind of puts things in perspective about when people have complaints, especially in North America here, where it's like, what's your biggest complaint? It's like it rained today or something. And it's really dramatic stuff. So anyway, I didn't want to get off all into the whole politics, but I just want people to understand, because you're someone who actually lived that experienced that thing, having to like flee your homeland
at a young
essentially
age.
at a young age, and certainly had, I'm sure.
And fortunately, I was young, you know, and like I think credit to my mother, because it was my mother, my sister, and I that came over, and you know, she had been there her whole life. She'd never known anything else, right? And so in her, I think it was late 40s at the time, she redid everything, right? She started totally from scratch. I was 14. I was an angry teenager, but it wasn't like my whole life was ruined. You know, it's like at age 14, you can sort of start over, hit the refresh button. Right. But yeah, I mean, it was very traumatic for sure. I haven't. It hasn't affected me that I know of long term, except for fueling that constant desire for wildlife. I think if I'd continued to live in Zimbabwe, I would have grown up. I would have gone to school, come back to Zimbabwe, become a safari guide like everybody else, and just like stayed in the bush and fiddled with animals, which I love. But now I feel like, and maybe this is arrogant to say, I'm making a much larger difference by spreading this message on a much bigger platform than I ever could by being a safari guide.
Yeah.
That's I completely get it.
And yeah, I mean, one thing, just to give, you mentioned your family went back 6 generations, and one thing you and I talked about before that I touched on is your grandfather actually discovered or collected what, the 3rd or 4th known coelacanth, which I thought was an incredible short.
Yep.
Really?
Yeah, which is an incredible, to me personally, it was an incredible story, having gone to school in South Africa where I knew Margaret Smith, whose husband J.L.B. Smith collected the first, well, it was Marjorie Courtney Latimer, but J.L.B. got the fame for collecting the first coelacanth. And your grandfather, was the third one? The third one he got?
Third or fourth, I'm not sure, but no, it was a lovely story, and it was one of those things that inspired my love for the ocean. My grandfather was a businessman. He owned a small chain of retail clothing shops, like upscale, like a Men's Warehouse chain. He owned 3 of them. They weren't like a huge thing, only in Zimbabwe. So he was not like a scientist. He was not, you know, he loved the bush and wildlife, but he wasn't a scientist. He wasn't an academic or anything like that. He was on vacation in the Comores with my grandmother before they were married, so that should tell you how long ago that was, because they're very old. And he was walking through a fish market, and sitting on this table was this dinosaur-looking fish, and he had no idea what it was, but he knew something wasn't right when he looked at it. And so he collected it, had it frozen, and flew it back to Salisbury, which is now Harare. It was the capital of Rhodesia, Zimbabwe at the time. And it turned out to be the 3rd or 4th, I don't remember specifically which one, but one of the first ever whole non-rotten specimens of a coelacanth, which, you know, and he worked with all of the people that you just mentioned, Dave. He sent it to South Africa, it got analyzed, it got taxidermied, or maybe it was dried, I don't even remember, put in the Salisbury Museum. It was like really cool, and this was all just from a guy who, you know, was a tailor basically, and it was this like very big discovery at the time.
And the people that you talk about, you know, Forrest goes and looks for things that, you know, people haven't seen in decades, and I do the same thing. This was a fish that nobody had seen for 70 million years. That was first discovered in 1938 with J.L.B. Smith, and then they got another one in the Comores, and then they say Forrest's grandfather got like the 3rd known one from the Comores. And so it's so you kind of got that in your lineage there, Forrest, with your grandfather stumbling across this fish. And if for those of you who won't go into the whole coelacanth story, but go check it out. It was one of the fossil fishes that they thought was extinct for 70 million years. It turned up in southern Africa, and it's an incredible story to go pull it up, and you guys, it's an incredible story. And I thought it was such a small world that Forrest's grandfather got like the 3rd or 4th one that ever came up and everything. So I just had to touch on that, because to me it's an incredible story. I love that.
No, with pleasure. It's incredible to me too. I mean, it was my grandfather was a huge inspiration to me, and a very, very inspiring. So that story stuck with me literally all through my you know, childhood years, all through my sub-adult years, and into college, and it helped fuel this sort of desire to look for these rare and lost animals. So yeah, no, I'm glad you brought it up. I love you.
Well, now, like, you know, going back to the high school part and going into university. Now, obviously, you have this unwavered passion for wildlife, and then you follow a science degree instead of like a business degree. So was your plan after high school, hey, I'm gonna go down, like I want to be a scientist? Is that what it was, or was there a chance that you'll go into like guiding or ecotourism or any kind of business like your grandfather or anything like that? Like, what was the decision to follow that science path?
Well, there's a couple factors. First of all, Andrew, it was the only thing I was ever good at, right? Was animals. I was never very good. I sucked at maths. I sucked at English. Like I still can't even draw a stick figure. So it was really the only thing that I was good at was studying animals. And I've always been very sort of mono-focused like that, where there's one thing that I'm interested in and I give everything to it. So I came out of high school, whatever, I got into college, but I knew that I was going to study wildlife. I didn't know if I was going to be an academic. I think deep down I thought I was going to go back to Zimbabwe and become a guide, but honestly that ship has sailed. That life is over. And I just knew that I wanted to learn more about wildlife. Going back to that sort of earthworm analogy, I still wanted to know about it. And being a safari guide, and I'll stand by this and I'll probably get some hate for it, you're never going to meet a scientist who has a better behavioral understanding of wildlife than safari guides or people that are with those animals every day. But There's a big difference between having a behavioral understanding and having like an academic intrinsic understanding. Yep. And so I didn't really have the option to have that behavioral day-to-day understanding and exposure. So instead, I opted for the academic one. You know, that was like the next best thing. And I don't say that to down credit academia at all. It was just, for me, it was like, okay, I can't go in the bush every day. How can I still be around animals? Well, if I go to UC Santa Barbara, I sign up for the Marine Bio and the HERP program. I can see pickled things in the museum every day. I can tinker with them. I can learn all the stuff I want. And I did. I was a curator at CBER, which is the Cheadle Center for and Ecological Restoration at UCSB for like 3 years. And I pickled every snake I could find and every roadkill and every shark. And it was awesome. I loved it. So it was just sort of a different route that I think ultimately was going to lead to the same thing for me.
So your goal was just to always be around animals. That was the key.
100%.
Whether they were pickled or alive, that was the goal, is just how can I maximize my exposure to discovering animals and following them and just being around them.
And just understanding them and just learning more about them in every facet, academically, behaviorally, you name it. But just understanding them to the best of my ability. And I still do it. We talked about being the weird kid. I used to read field guides for fun. The last field guide that I read for fun was Dave's newest shark book, I swear. But I used to literally thumb through field guides, like before Pokemon was a thing. So I think Pokemon came out when I was like in college already. Before Pokemon was a thing, I could look through a field guide and tell you the Latin name and its superpower and how strong it was and its bite force. And, that was like my version of Pokemon as a kid. And that just contributed to making me weird. So, it was just that for me, it was just always about understanding and learning as much about these things as I could.
That's amazing. So after university, you go to university. And then after university, what was the plan? Like, did you even have a plan? Like, what was the focus? You want to be around animals. What was the first thing you were doing or thinking about doing?
I really didn't have a plan, and I think that this is a message to any of your young listeners or whatever it happens to be. But I was very lost when I got out of university. I had this scientific degree in my head. I think everybody thinks it's funny. I was just at my cousin's UCLA graduation, and she thinks she's got it all figured out because she's graduated, right? You come out of there and you don't have any of it figured out. But, I came out of school thinking like, okay, I've got this biology degree with these cool emphasis. Like, not a lot of people get these special degrees. I'm going to have all these job opportunities and offers and get to do exactly what I want. And I went from like having good grades and doing well in school and having these special emphasis and majors and minors to literally picking weeds and counting ants as a biological field tech. That was literally my next job. And I was like, wait a minute, like I'm the guy that was catching and tagging all these rattlesnakes in college. I was like the hotshot undergrad. Now I'm like bottom of the food chain. And I didn't mind that at all because I loved being out in the field, which is what I got to do as a tech. But I did not have it all figured out. I just knew I wanted to do wildlife. And I kept focusing on it. And the thing that I think started to set me apart before I got into TV and everything else was like, we'd go out to like Chimeneas Reserve, which is a reserve here in Central California, and we do a rattlesnake tagging project, right, where you paint their tails with some nail polish, and that way you can find them again. You put a little pit tag in them. And the goal would be, okay, everybody meet at 7 a.m. and it gets too hot by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. See how many snakes you can get, and come back. Now everybody would go out at 7. I'd go out at 4:30 in the morning. Okay, and this was on my own devices. At this time, I wasn't like under the supervision of anybody. I'd leave at 4:30 in the morning. I'd get back around 7 p.m. I would go the whole day. Everybody else would get 3, 4 rattlesnakes, maybe 2. I'd come back with 14 snakes tagged and pitted or whatever. And it wasn't because I was trying to show off or anything like that. I just loved it. I'm like, what am I going to do? Go sit around the research station for the afternoon while it's hot? Like, fuck that. I got a car. I got my legs. Let's go. And I would just go. And I think I was very lucky that I sort of climbed up within the company that I was working for biologically very, very quickly, because they just saw this enthusiasm, which is the same enthusiasm I have for communicating wildlife, for just doing this stuff. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do, but whenever I was working with critters, I was happy and elated. And I could go for 15 hours in a day and it wouldn't bug me, and I'd do it again the next day. And I'm getting older now and I have a kid, so things are slowing down a hair. But I still, I still sort of feel like I at least possess the mental ability to do that. And I think that has helped a lot, just having that drive.
You never really along that way thought about science communication. You just want to be out amongst the wildlife, basically. You never really, at what point did you start thinking about a science communication type of career track?
Yeah, so I knew that I wanted to make a difference, right? I always felt like safari guides made a difference because they connected people to animals and they inspired passion. And I felt like as a biologist, being an academic, even though I was low down, I was still making a little bit of a difference. I was contributing to papers, and I was tagging snakes, and I was still making a difference. But there was a very specific point at which I made the decision to make that switch. At no point did I think about media. I didn't know about TV. I thought Discovery Channel made Discovery Channel shows, and like those were rock stars that nobody would ever talk to, like a whole different world. And what happened was I came back one day. I had a 3-week contract doing habitat restoration on the California Channel Islands. I was living at the research station out in Santa Cruz, middle of summer, boiling hot, in a hazmat suit all day long. Can't remember if that one was weeds or ants or mice or what it was, but it was one of the shitty jobs that I'd taken, because I was always bidding on these contracts and taking all the worst ones that nobody wanted, because I was like, I don't care. And I came back and I was just covered in sweat and dirt and exhausted. I'd been living in a sleeping bag doing this tech work out at the islands, and I plopped down on the couch, and my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, she's flipping through the channels, and this stupid survival show comes on TV called Naked and Afraid, right? And it's this show where people get naked and see if they can survive. Nowadays, it's like a big drama, but in the first couple seasons, it was very much so about the survival element.
It was raw, like it was
really
tough.
raw.
Yeah.
And so I was on the I was the I think it was the first one of season 2, maybe it was the end of season 1. I don't even remember. But long story short, I plop down on the couch, I start watching these things. And my wife's flipping, and she goes, I've seen you do all this crap just for fun, just to catch a rattlesnake, just to go out and stay out and see condors or whatever it is. She's like, you can do all this stuff better than these people. So I sent in this cocky email to the production company. I waited till the end credits rolled. I saw the title of a production company. I sent in this cocky email going, this is nonsense. Like, these people suck, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't that bad. But I sent in this cocky email. 10 days later, I'm on a plane to Panama. I'm dumped in the jungles butt naked, and I do the survival show. Now, I don't have a hard time at all. I enjoy it. I gorge myself on oysters. I dig up hundreds of pounds of yucca like jungle potatoes. Literally, I have a blast. And it's all because I'm the nerd that used to read field guides, right? And still did. And that, by the way, big lesson here. If you're a good biologist, you're a great survivalist, because if you understand the environment and the ecology, you can survive anywhere. So I was just thriving on this show. I get back, go back to normal work, right? Just go back to regular, being on the islands, being up in the ranches, never think about science communication. I did this as a vacation. 9 months, 10 months later, the show comes out. It's a big hit. I'm a big hit. And it's all very exciting. Now, that moment that you were asking about, or that moment that I was going to reference, Dave, when I had been a tech, or I think it was actually towards the end of my undergrad, I contributed to a scientific paper that was published, okay? It took like a year and a half. I'd done basically all the field work for it. I can't remember if I was a co-author. I don't even remember anymore. But I remember it was a big deal. Sam Sweet. It got 400 reads, okay? And that was like a good number. 400 reads, right? Now, that was 400 reads by like-minded scientists who already knew the subject matter. The night that stupid-ass naked TV show came out, 4 million people watched me running around the jungle catching snakes and picking up lobsters, okay? And I was like, wait a minute. I think I know where I can do a little bit more damage here.
Right.
And that was literally the very next day when I looked at the ratings, I called my boss. I told him that I've loved working for you. I'll still do supervising for you if you need. I'll still do contracting, but like I'm done. I told my wife, like, this is what I want to do. I want to figure out how to not be naked on TV, but talk about animals and wildlife on TV. The naked on TV was another route. Yeah,
it's a good strategy.
Yeah. And it sucked for a long time. It took years living on my wife's part-time teacher's salary for years, not figuring it out, blundering every step of the way. But finally stuff started to click. And yeah, that was, it was those few years, those 3 or 4 years where I gave it all my focus, that I figured out what TV was, how it was made, who pitched it, how you created it, what a cameraman does, what a sound guy does, why you have to have insurance, like all the crap that you never think of. And that was really how it started.
So you kind of figured it out on your own, like through trial and error, just like, I'm going to pitch a show. Okay, that pitch wasn't good. And then somebody tells you, do it this way. Okay. And it just continued to do that. Then you figure out the whole insurance and liability aspect of it all. And so it took you a while to figure out, did you have any like mentors or people to kind of rely on as you went through that? Yeah.
I did figure it out on my own, but that was only like the beginning stepping stones. And so what I did is I saw what TV pitches look like, and I started making them. And oh my God, when I look back at those old ones, I'm sure you guys know that feeling. Like you look back at something you published or something you created 15 years ago.
My first couple of podcasts,
Yeah, you're like, I'm so embarrassed this ever went out. And I look back at those original pitches, and I'm just like, I hang my head. Like, I'm surprised I haven't just thrown my computer against the wall. But, I created them myself. I copied them. And I went around to, like, every single production company in LA, and I got no everywhere I went. You're a nobody. This is nothing. What a waste of time. You're not proven, blah, 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 blah. And eventually, after totally giving up on Los Angeles, I flew to New York. And literally the second production company I walked into, I sat down with the guy who's now my business partner. His name was Eric Evangelista. Dave's had several conversations with him. Very, very smart guy. And I pitched him a show, which wasn't Extinct or Alive, but it was a version of it. And he basically was like, yep, let's do it. Get out of my office. And I was like, okay. And I couldn't even believe
that at all.
Yeah, totally. And I was like, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye. And I like ran out of his office and called my wife. But he became a mentor to me. I partnered with another guy named Patrick DeLuca, who's also a producer, but they weren't wildlife people.
Right.
And so the choice that I made, and part of it was certainly by luck, was not to find more guys like you, Dave and Andrew, who know the same stuff I know, and know it a lot better than I do, but to find guys like Eric and Patrick who knew TV and knew production and knew show running and field producing and all these things. Because I could bring the wildlife knowledge, whether it was academically trained from experience in the field or just from studying, I could bring that knowledge. And so it was like, how do I find people that can mentor me and I can partner with that have the other side of the coin figured out? And that's how it sort of started to evolve. And it was very slow, and I made a ton of mistakes, but eventually it started to click.
I think a key thing,
amazing,
just for people to understand, like just the persistence, and that's something whether you're pursuing the career you did, or you're pursuing an academic or a research career, whatever you pursue, it's that persistence that's going to get you there. Whatever it is, it's not like, if you'd have given up after the first couple of people slammed the door in your face in LA, it'd have been probably back like looking at ants or something on Santa Cruz Island or something. So,
and you know that, Dave, better than anybody. It's the same as looking for lost animals, right? Or lost sharks or creatures that haven't been seen in a long time. If it was easy, they wouldn't be lost, right? If it was easy to do it, everybody would be doing it. Right. And so that persistence, for me, that's that's always just been a part of my nature. Like, I don't mind taking a no. You can tell me to fuck off and I'll still smile at you and tell you that I like you, you know? And that's never bugged me. I don't mind rejection. In fact, I like to take rejection and try and learn from it. And I think a lot of people don't feel that way. They take rejection very personally. And I just don't. It's like, okay, if I did it wrong, tell me what I did wrong so I can do it better next time. And that learning from that rejection, that learning from that persistence, I've made mistakes on Extinct or Alive. I've made mistakes in every aspect of my life, just like most people. But I try and take those experiences and persist through those mistakes to then improve. And it's funny because if I watch my TV shows, you just see like how far it's come just by trying to learn each time I do one and make things better. And not just as a presenter, but as producers and as cameramen and everything else. It just continues to get better because it's just part of the trade.
You're producing now, aren't you? Doing the production side of things as well.
I am. Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, I know. I saw
yeah. So my Eric and I.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Eric and I. We created a company called Fantasticus Pictures, which was named after the tortoise that we found, the lost tortoise. And it's the only production company that I'm aware of that is actively funding conservation work in exchange for access. And so what we do is we find somebody like you, Dave, and this is all new. We've only been doing this for about a year and a half, but we've been successful so far. But we'll find somebody like you, Dave, and say, hey, Dave, you want to go find lost sharks. Okay, let us fund that work. We'll put you on the plane. We'll pay you a salary. We'll fund all that work that obviously costs a lot in exchange for coming along and filming you and having access to that. And we do that as long as the network, whoever it happens to be, Discovery, Animal Planet, Nat Geo, BBC, you name it, goes, yeah, that's something we want to put on TV. So they pay us, you know, as a production company, and then we have a line item, which is basically just paying for the conservation work. And we've done some huge projects. We moved 14 elephants earlier last year. Wow. And we've done some huge projects. And it's all been done instead of basically profiting by paying that money that we would have profited into the conservation work, which is so rewarding and so much fun because I get to tag along with people like you, Dave, and all these other incredible scientists and get to go and do the thing that I love, but have real experts doing it, and it's been very successful so far.
Yeah, well, I tell people, because I came from went through the academic side, research side of stuff, and then kind of got into this stuff, doing this TV stuff later in my career. But a lot of the stuff like the programs like I've done with you and other programs I've done with Shark Week, Nat Geo, BBC, it's basically, nobody would fund this. I could not get funding through a traditional source, but I find a production company or TV show, and they're going to say, hey, can we like go to like Taiwan and follow you around the fish markets? I'm like, sure. Basically, we just want to film you doing what you do, and we'll pay you for it. And I'm like, okay, because nobody else.
Right.
And so like I'm like, sure, I get the work done, make some money, and as I say, no traditional sources would fund something like that, or some of the crazy stuff I've done. Well, the show you and I did, I looked for like 3 lost sharks at that time. And nobody would have funded a project like that. So
no.
It's
well, I think. Yeah. And I think that, what's really interesting here is the traditional funding agencies and foundations, seem not to have as much money for this type of funding, and to have different sort of funding sources like a production company to say, hey, we'll benefit you by funding your work, and you'll benefit us by letting us tag along and film your work. And then it's just like a plus here, and then on the above, both of you get to have like a larger science communication and conservation sort of communication type of work. So everybody benefits, including the people that are watching at home, and that is what in my opinion, that's one of the reasons why I went into science communication, and I think you've mentioned it too, Forrest, is people need to know about all this stuff. They need to know about the animals. They need to know about the conservation projects. They need to know how hard it is, how fun it is to do these types of projects, and to just tag along and bring your expertise to that of a communication perspective, plus your sort of like your passion for the wildlife and finding these things, and your ability to be able to communicate the science adds that extra aspect to the entertainment factor of the audience, for the audience. And I just think that's a great way of doing it. When you went to the funding for those shows, and you pitched it that way, how did the sort of the financiers sort of how did they react to that?
Well, they ultimately they don't care because they don't, and I'll just be honest here. Discovery Channel, Nat Geo, Netflix, and any of the networks, they don't care about conservation. They don't. I'm sorry. There might be people at those networks that do, individuals, but as an organization, they don't give a shit about elephants or sharks or tigers or pandas. They don't care about any of it, okay? They care about ratings and selling ad space and the things that a functioning business typically cares about. So when you take it to them and go, hey, we're going to pay for this incredible work to be done, maybe there's one or two people that are excited by that, but ultimately they don't care. What they care about is, that's fine, take it out of your own budget, figure out how to pay for it yourself, and assure me that it's going to be educational, entertaining, exciting, I can sell ad space, blah, blah, blah. And so we have to do a dance, very similar to, writing a grant proposal. We have to do a song and dance that goes, well, here's why it checks all the boxes, okay? Mm-hmm. And they don't care whether or not it checks the box of funding conservation work, truthfully. And I'm not trying to be a jerk, but it's just the truth. They don't actually care. Yeah, no. They care, is it going to rate well? Is it exciting? Is it educational? If I had my choice of episodes to do of my show Extinct or Alive, there would have been insects, there would have been little salamanders, all these fascinating microorganisms. But if it didn't have teeth or claws, they didn't really care, right? Because teeth and claws rate well. And so that's why sharks did well. And granted, and Dave can speak to this too, we found 3 small, innocuous sharks, but there were big sharks around and tiger sharks and toothy sharks. And, there was a hippo. Like, there was plenty of the cool, scary stuff that kept the people that weren't interested in the science side watching. And so we have to check all these boxes. And ultimately, when you pitch it, it doesn't really matter to them if you go, hey, it funds conservation, it doesn't fund conservation. They just want to know, can we do it within a reasonable budget? And if so, is it going to check these like viewership boxes? And so I have to do the dance of like, is Dave, if he's my guy, is he good TV? Well, he's great TV because, we saw that on Lost Sharks. Awesome. Is what he's doing good? Yeah, it's fantastic. Sharks are cool. So it's like there's plenty of sciences and scientists that I will never be able to sell and get the opportunity to work with and show what they're doing. And I just won't. And I'm sorry that I won't. But it'll never get funded by these big corporations. But the exciting ones that we can sort of mold and shape into this path will get done. And that's what's been working for us so far.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of...
Yeah, I mean, and that's a... Sorry, go ahead.
A lot of the... And Forrest, you and I have talked about this. There's obviously, if you're doing sharks, you're kind of cool. It's kind of cool with Shark Week. But if you have like a lot of some rays, and you and I have talked, there's a number of ray species that haven't been seen like in a frickin' 100 years, and I probably know where to go find them actually. But it's like getting the funding to go there. And Shark Week is like, well, it's not Ray Week. It's like, well, it's Flat Shark Week maybe, but they won't do it even though from a conservation standpoint, that would be huge to find some of these things. But they just, because it's not a traditional shark, they just don't. It's just hard to get them excited about it. So you got to kind of come up with some kind of a shark to go find, and well, better than I, trying to sell them on these smaller sharks, which again are ecologically very important to the ecosystem, and we haven't seen them like the show you and I did, Land of the Lost Shark. They had the one species they hadn't, the white-tipped weasel shark. They had one specimen from 1984, and nobody had seen that thing since. And we found it. And it was just like,
I know. And what's weird is, and I always say this, they think they know best at these networks, and they don't. Because, and I'm not trying to pretend that any of us know better, but when I put out a show like that like the one that we did, Dave, people love it. That was the highest rated show of the week, by the way. That Shark Week you and I did, I don't know if I ever told you, this was the highest rated Shark Week of Shark Week 3 or 4 years ago. People loved flap-nosed hound sharks and white-tipped weasel sharks and ornate sleeper rays.
It's different.
It's different. They're tired of seeing Jaws jump out of the air and do a backflip. Like, don't get me wrong, it's spectacular, but like, there's only so many ways you can film that damn thing, Well, and so man, it's tough. So I could rant all day, but anyway.
but I it's really interesting though with when you talk about network TV. And you talk about sort of the people who are in charge of those network TV. There's a bit of not a gatekeeping, but like you said, you have to fit a type of mold, and you have to fit a type of show and entertainment factor. What are your feelings about? I mean, you podcast, you are active online, like social media and stuff and things like that. Where do you see things like YouTube or even TikTok or even like sort of live sort of live streaming like on Twitch and things like that. Do you think that that has an opportunity to do those types of projects, you know, where it's not necessarily the overly popular, but entertaining for that niche target audience that wants to see something different, or the scientist that, hey, I would watch that? Do you think that's an avenue that, say, like your production company would do to go down towards like a YouTube show, you know, or a YouTube channel and say, hey, we're just going to produce these types of things that we want to do? And I'm sure there are animals that you want to find that maybe the networks won't fund. But, you know, you could say, hey, you know, if we can get the money to do this and we can prove that we can get the ratings on a YouTube channel, and that's like evergreen because it just keeps going and going and going. Right. Do you see a value in that, like in the future or even present day?
Absolutely. I think, you know, and a lot of people poo-poo social media, TikTok and all these things. I think they're fantastic, right? I don't care what the communication device is. I don't care if it's a book. I don't care if it's YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or cable television or streaming service. They're all different methods to get a message out there, right? Now, as far as like myself, it's a scary proposition, right? Because if I'm going to do a TV show, I sell the idea to a network, they fund it. Worst case scenario, I run out of money and we shut the thing down, right? That's like the worst case scenario. Now, that's never happened yet. The flip side of that, doing YouTube or something like that, you have to take the risk of paying for it all up front and then hope that over the long term it builds up enough momentum to pay you back. And that's been so successful. You know, I'm friends with a guy named Coyote Peterson, who's a huge animal YouTube guy. And I mean, he's making tons of money, and he's now able to afford and fund anything that he wants to do because he has such a built-in audience that he knows no matter what he does, people are going to watch it. But he started with like him and his cell phone, right? Just filming stuff around his yard. And so he did a great job with it, but it's such a scary proposition because the level of stuff that we do, I don't want to be the guy that films stuff around my yard with a phone, right?
Yeah,
That's not the production.
You're not at that point anymore. Yeah.
No, I'm not. And so in order to be like, hey, Dave, let's you and I go find lost flat sharks in West Africa, right? I'm just making that all up. That costs a fortune, right? And to be honest, it's not like as a production company we're sitting on a pile of money. We get given money for a project and we spend it all and then we're on to the next project. And so it's just a scary proposition to do it at a high production value.
For sure.
And I feel like, and I don't want to discredit any YouTubers or TikTokers or anything else because it's awesome. It's its own medium. I feel passionate about putting out wildlife in high production value, not cell phone videos, and and I know that some of them get billions of views and it's freaking awesome, but I want to film them with the same cameras they're filming Avatar with, right? I want to make them as beautiful as I can, and that's an expensive proposition as well. So this isn't a finance podcast, but the short answer is I'm scared to do that because I don't know where it'll go, and I don't really have the resources to just up and do it tomorrow.
Well, and it makes sense. I mean, especially when I think you're right. I think there's a bit of a sacrifice in the like you said, the production value of what you want to do compared to what would be okay for like a YouTube video or a TikTok or whatever that might be. And I think that's fair. I think that's you know, that makes sense from you know, this is how you want to bring wildlife to people, and you you know, you're connected into that world, and so you follow what you basically work the best you can. You're like, hey, I want to discover this, and you work those shows and you get those projects. What was your you've done a lot, and we don't have time to go through all the stuff you've done, but what was your favorite sort of expedition that made it to TV?
Probably I'd say there's two. My favorite one that I think we ever did. Well, no, I'll tell you this. The one that I was the most emotionally invested in was the thing I did on my last season of my new show, Mysterious Creatures, which was that elephant move that I mentioned briefly.
Right.
And I got to go home to southern Africa. There was this herd of rogue elephants that were killing people that the government of Mozambique wanted to euthanize because, you know, it's really cheap to shoot a bullet and kill an elephant. And, like, we came in and we spent all of our budget. Like, I lost money on it, which is totally fine. I don't care. But, like, I just put everything I had into this, and we moved 14 elephants in 24 hours. And we had 3 helicopters, and we had 6 semi-trucks, and we had 35 personnel, and we had 3 vets. And I mean, it was just this huge ordeal that I funded. And I felt so good because I took this money from a network. You know, I felt like Robin Hood. I was taking money from the big evil corporation. I was giving it to a conservation organization, and we were coming out of there with happy elephants, happy animals, and a thriving environment because it was desperate for large herbivores to fix the ecology. And so it was like this trifecta of good conservation, and I just felt so good. And on top of that, just elephants, right? They're so big, they're so emotive, you know, they're just these huge, magnificent creatures that are dwindling year after year, and it just felt so good. And it wasn't the hardest. We stayed in a beautiful camp, you know. It wasn't like we were in the middle of nowhere the whole time. It wasn't the hardest, it wasn't the most difficult or any of those things, but it was just I had such an emotional attachment and riding these highs and lows of, are we going to kill an elephant? Is somebody going to get killed? Like, what's going to happen? And fortunately it all worked out for the best, but boy, was it just like an emotional thing. Like, I almost, and I'm not a very emotional person, I almost burst into tears when these elephants started to run out from the transport boxes. Like, I almost just lost it. I didn't because I was trying to be tough, but
There's a camera on me. There's a camera on me. There's a camera on me.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, like, when you, I agree with you. Those are the projects that you'll never forget. Like, your team you and your team helped save 14 elephants, and like you said, they're dwindling, they're in trouble, and you were able to relocate them into an area that they'll flourish and hopefully bring back, you know, and help revitalize as well, which is unreal. Now, this is a shark podcast, and we've been talking about elephants and hyenas and all these wonderful snakes and everything. What is the and Dave, this is a question to you too, but we'll ask Forrest first. What's the shark that you want to discover that you have never seen before? Not necessarily haven't discovered yet, like not found, but what's the shark that you want to see the most? And Dave, I'm going to ask you the same question after.
I'm very curious to hear Dave's because mine's pretty generic. I've never seen a sawfish. I would love to. Love to. Dave and I worked together briefly on a project to try and go and do them in Northern Australia right before COVID hit. Like, we were lining everything up. The network was on board, everything. And then, bam, COVID kicked in. And I just like to see one of these. What do they get? Like 18 feet total length? Feet, like 18-foot long fish. 20 feet with this rostrum of this sword spikes. Yeah. I've seen their swords, right? I've seen them in collections and in villages and stuff. I've never seen one, not in Florida where I know people see them regularly and tag. I've just never seen one. I know it's sort of not the rarest shark in the world, but for me to see one of these alien-like creatures is definitely at the top of my list.
Yeah. Nice. Dave, how about yourself?
I'd say the sawfish is a good one. I've seen a lot of dead ones in fish markets around Africa, but to see one live in the wild would be definitely cool. But if my one shark I'd like to see sometime, and it'd have to be in unusual circumstances, is a big-eyed sand tiger. That would be my literal bucket list. I could probably drop the mic on that one. It would be. There's only been a handful of these things ever seen in the world. They get quite big. It's not so much the size, but they're just so rare and unusual. And it's, again, one that almost nobody has heard of, but they're open ocean, pelagic. It'd be awesome to get one to where you could actually maybe go free diving and film one in the water. It'd be phenomenal.
How deep are they, Dave? I'm not gonna lie, I had to Google it to know
that's fine.
It was. Yeah, how deep are they?
They go down deep.
How deep are these big-eyed sand tigers? They look like it.
Yeah, they go deep, but they come up. They catch them a lot of times in long line tuna fisheries. So they'll get within 100 meters or less. Sometimes almost at the surface, they'll come up. They're usually it's an open ocean thing. It's a pelagic species, and as they say, they catch them on billfish and tuna long lines. But that would be, to me, to see one of those in the open ocean. And somehow to be able to keep it around to be able to free dive on it would be that would be my nirvana to see one of those things. So
that'd be amazing.
Are there any hot spots for them? Any seamounts like Cocos or Malpelo or any of those hot spots where it's that's the spot?
I could talk to you off air about it. Yeah, there is a spot.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Fair enough.
There is a spot.
That's cool. I'm just
I actually pitched that to Discovery several years ago, and they weren't buying it. But Yeah, this is years before I knew you. I actually pitched that to them, and they were like, no, they weren't having it. So I was like, it'd still be a long shot, but there is one place I know of where we'd probably have a better than average chance if we're doing it right to maybe come across one. But we can talk later after the show about that one. I don't want to give this one away.
Yeah, for sure. That's just so cool. No, of course, yeah. I understand. That's just, I mean, it's such a, I just pulled one up on my computer. It's just such an amazing looking. I love the weird sharks, and you're so lucky, Dave, because you get to work with the weirdest of weird sharks. Yeah. I think
they're the most
so
character.
Cool. Andrew, what's yours? You got to say what your shark is. You can't do that to us and not give your input.
Yeah, well, I agree. Well, to be honest, you know, I don't have the experience and the opportunities that you guys have, you know, to go out and search a shark, and it's a very, you know, generic, and people do it every day, but it's I'd love to, you know, be in the water with a whale shark. Like I've never done that before. I think to compare the sheer size of me compared to a whale shark, and watch it like zoom by, because every time you see it on TV they slow it down, I was told, and to be able to just get in the water and see it. I don't want to be close. I just want to see it in the water and just be like, I would probably come up in a bit of tears if I was able to see that, because I find them spectacular. I think they're amazing animals. I love sort of the spotted pattern on the dorsal part, and how it's unique and how you can identify them. That would just get me. It's
a great one. It's one of those animals. I always say that there's a bunch of animals in the world that if you didn't know it existed and you told somebody about it, they'd tell you it was an alien or it wasn't real.
Right.
And it's one of those animals that, you know, if you showed it to somebody who'd never, they'd be like, that's like a sci-fi thing. You'd be like, no, really, that's a real shark. It's so cool. That's a great answer.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. I guess that, you know, as we kind of get to the end of the interview here, I want to talk about something that I think, you know, the people who listen to this podcast, you know, are a lot of early career scientists, want to get into sharks. A lot of people want to get into science communication. So, you know, having you on and going through the stories and hearing your journey through this is really important. But as anybody, and you know as well, you know, being in the public eye, there's a lot of scrutiny that happens, and there's a lot of criticism that happens. And, you know, you have and anybody who starts out with the ability to want to get people interested in, comes in with a sort of probably like a little bit of a naive eye on this, be like, hey, I want to share my passion, and I just want to go into that. Now, I know you've had some controversies. You've had, you know, you could Google your name, and there are people who, you know, are not happy with you, and there are people who love you, and you know, it goes back and forth. You know, how do you deal with it, and what advice would you give for upcoming science communicators? We know a lot of people who will be on this podcast eventually, or who we know, you know, personally, who are kind of coming through the ranks and have been on TV a little bit. How do you kind of deal with that type of sort of love-hate relationship? And then what advice would you give others?
Totally. Well, first of all, as people in sort of the showbiz will tell you, as soon as you have haters, it means you've made it, right? It means enough people are watching to dislike you, which is hilarious. But in the beginning, for me, like, I remember my first hater. Somebody put something online or wrote some, you know, blog post or something. Somebody sent it to me, and I was like floored. I was so upset, and I was like, why would somebody dislike me and dislike what I'm doing? Like, all I'm trying to do is, like, show the world how great these animals are. And, like, yes, I over-dramatize jumping off a waterfall or, you know, getting chased by some. Of course, it's TV, you know? I feel like people have that common sense. But I remember the first few, I was just flabbergasted. I wasn't, like, mad or upset. I wanted to, like, talk to those people and be like, and I did, by the way, don't ever do that. And I would, like, and I'll get into that, but I would, like, reach out and be like, hey, you know, Jim Smith, like, I'm so sorry you didn't like that show. Like, what, and, you know, as soon as you engage, it gets worse, right? Like, the second you respond on the internet, and that's where it comes from. It's from these keyboard warriors, right? None of these people would ever say these things to your face. And so in the beginning, it totally irked me, and it would upset me. And I don't know if it's still around. Honestly, I don't look that regularly.
Right.
My advice to people that are up and coming, first of all, if you're getting hate, it means you've made it. So good job. you know?
Yeah.
And secondly, just do what you think is right. Now, you'll make mistakes. I look back at certain things I did. One thing comes in mind where we went out and we found this caiman, and I didn't credit the guy who I initially made phone calls with, who told me basically the general area. And it wasn't because I didn't choose to credit him. It was because I'd totally forgotten. I'd spoken to 200 different people, and the one scientist who was the main guy I had forgotten about along the process. And it blew up like it was his thing. And I'm like, I didn't know it was his thing, you know? And I'm like so sorry in hindsight that I hadn't had a better understanding and gone through it and given him more credit and interviewed him for the show and had him come with and all these things that would have made it better and helped his work out. Because that's what I want to do. I don't want the credit or the glory. I want to share the credit and glory of these incredible animals and the people that are working day in and day out to protect them. Not me, who shows up for 2 weeks to make a TV show. That's not the point. The point is to show the work in these animals. And so, anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but my point is just stick to what you think is right. You're going to make mistakes, okay? Just don't compromise your own morals. Don't go the wrong way. And I've been close to doing that too, where I'm like, oh, the network just wants me to do this like bullshitty thing over here, and it's like it's a good gig, and I haven't worked in a while, and blah blah blah. And it's like, no, don't do that. Like stick to what you're true to. Stick to your morals. You're gonna get hate. There's nearly 10 billion people on the planet now, right? If somebody in that 10 billion doesn't like you, that's unbelievable. So you know, if they're loud or not, who cares? But it's just like, it doesn't matter. You know, if you feel like what you're doing is important, then stick with it. And I'll say this. I don't mean to rant on for this too much. I get probably in the ballpark between 50 and 250 messages per day from people going, you've inspired me. I'm going to college to be a biologist. I love wildlife because of you. I've changed my major. I'm volunteering at a shelter. I'm rescuing snakes, whatever it happens to be. I get like 100, like I said, like between 50 and 250 of those messages per day. And then like twice a week, I'll get something negative. And the thing that I go to straight away is the negative thing, where I'm like, God, what the fuck? Like, you know, and I get all upset about that. And if you step back and look at like the amount of positivity and the amount of inspiration, and I don't just mean that what I'm doing, but that's how people feel if they're following you and they're respecting you. You're inspiring a lot more people than the one or two angry, loud internet warriors, right? So forget about them. Just like keep doing what you're doing. It's so worth it when you get those messages of adoration, and not just adoration for you, but adoration for your craft and the fact that people are literally changing their lives because of something that you showed them on the internet or on television. And I mean, that is, man, that's inspiring.
I agree. I agree completely.
That's totally inspiring to get people inspired, like if nothing else, to pursue what they like to do. Like you want to be around wildlife, and so that's been you pursued that. You didn't exactly know you were going to end up doing what you're doing, but you pursued your passion. And that's what I always try to tell people, like whatever it is, whether it's sharks or whatever you want to do, like just be passionate about it and be persistent about it. And, you know, the rest of it will work itself out. Just, you know, you just gotta pursue that, pursue that passion and stay at and be persistent. That is absolutely, that'll get you way down the road to where you want to go and what you want to do. And you can surprise yourself, things you end up doing. Like I said, you really didn't think about the science communication so much when you were starting out as much. You just wanted to be in the wildlife, and you found a way to do it. And you know, that's, you know, that's kind of the same thing I've always done. Like I mean, people know me more over the last, you know, recent years doing the Lost Shark Eye, but I've been doing it for like almost 40 years. People before I started doing more of these TV stuff. There's a whole like 30 years of doing this before nobody even really knew like what I was just out doing it on my own. It's like we did that TV show. I was kind of laughing like, so you got TV crew following you around doing this stuff. And like, well, I used to do that, and nobody was following me around. I just went and did it. And, you know, people
totally.
You know, that was.
You almost feel like people miss so many stories, like so many stories people miss that you could have provided.
Well, that was back in the day before the internet.
It's like if you weren't.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. And you know, I often look at it like this: if I wasn't like. Nowadays, I'm getting paid to do the things that I love, which is helping people and inspiring people. If I wasn't, I'd be paying to do them. Do you know what I mean? It wouldn't change anything. I'd still be doing the same thing. And Dave, I know you're the same, because for 40 years, you were doing that, right? You were paying to go and find lost sharks out of whatever money you could raise, your own pocket, so on. And now you're getting paid to do it, you know, for papers and for TV and stuff like that. albeit it might not be to the level that any of us want it to be, but at least, you know, that really shows passion. So if you're able to do the thing that you want to do, no matter, regardless of sort of the financial consequences, I think you're really on to something.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Forrest, this has been such a pleasure to be able to have you on the podcast, getting to know you even more. It's easy to see why people fall in love with what you're doing. You're such a great storyteller. You're just such a great guy. So we appreciate you being on here and sharing your stories with us, and sharing some tips for people who are looking to get into science communication on that type of level. So I really appreciate your work. Good luck. Stay safe, of course, with all of that. And you have this is being published during Shark Week. You have a show coming out. Are you allowed to talk about like what's happening? Can you give us a breakdown of what's happening?
Sure. Yeah, I was really lucky. I got to work with one of Dave's. She was an undergrad of yours, right, Dave?
Grad student.
A grad student. Yeah, grad student. Vicky Vasquez. She's an awesome young lady.
Yeah.
She's really, really cool. And I got to work with her, and we went to Papua New Guinea, to a place that we have dubbed the Island of the Walking Sharks, which is exactly what we were looking for. We were looking for epaulet sharks. There are 3 known species in Papuan waters, and we were looking for unique behaviors. I won't say too much more, but the name kind of gives it away. They're walking sharks. So so we go on this really cool expedition into Papua New Guinea to look for the behavior of these walking sharks. And Vicky's along for a fraction of it, and you know, it's really fun. It's an adventure show. It's like most of my shows, where it's like 20% adventure, 80% wildlife oohing and awing and oogling, and seeing what cool stuff we can find along the way. And it's during Shark Week. I'm not sure which night, but it's that week of July 24th, the week this will be coming out. And it's a fun show. Forrest Galante and the Island of the Walking Sharks on Shark Week.
Amazing. Do you have anything else you want to promote, like books or anything you're coming up with recently? You're always up to something. So is there anything else?
No, I don't want to promote anything I'm doing. I want to promote listeners. You're saying this is for young scientists and young science communicators. I want to promote what they're doing and say, keep at it. If you're listening to this podcast, if you want any tips or advice, you can reach out to me on social media. I do miss a lot of stuff because I get a lot of messages, but just be persistent that was kind of the theme of this episode. So be persistent if you want to talk to me, but keep it up. I love this podcast. Is so great. It's inspiring people to do more science communication. In my opinion, there is no such thing as too much wildlife exposure, science communication, science exposure. You know, I love that this is what you guys are doing, and thank you to anybody that listened and followed along on this. It's really cool.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Forrest. This was really terrific. We're really looking forward to it. Great you made time to come on the show. Thanks very much.